guys, it's Cece, and today I'm here to talk about Shannon Hale. So I've been thinking recently that I have a lot of authors that I talk about constantly, and it would be fun to kind of create an author spotlight for those authors. Since I talk about them so often, I want to talk about which books are my favorite, what kind of books they write, and where you could possibly start if you want to read some of the books by this author. And I decided that the author that I really want to start with is Shannon Hale. Mainly because not only do I love her, but also she is a Utah author, and I am from Utah, and it just felt right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, a little bit about why I love her, and then talk about all of her books that I've read, and a couple that I haven't. So let's just jump in and start talking about Shannon Hale. Shannon Hale, as I said, is from Utah. She originally got a bachelor's in English from the University of Utah, and then she later got a master's in creative writing from the University of Montana. Just wanted to share that with you. She does currently now live in Utah again with her family. And because she lives in Utah, I have had the chance to meet her a few times, which is really awesome. But that means I've been able to hear her talk more about her books and the characters that she creates, and these events where I've been able to hear her speak have just made me love the things she writes more. So, what does Shannon Hale write? Shannon Hale writes mainly young adult fantasy. At least those are the books that I have read the most of. She also writes middle grade fantasy as well as occasionally diving into adult fiction. And she has actually written a couple of books with her husband as well, which is really cool. Now, for why I talk about Shannon Hale as often as I do. I love Shannon Hale because she writes beautifully complex female characters and female relationships. Some of these books have been incredibly influential to me in terms of seeing these different complex female characters and seeing fantasy books in which there is a majority female cast that all interact with one another and all have such different personalities and points of view, and it just allows for such a beautiful collection of female characters overall. Fantasy has a reputation for being mainly about male characters or having a majority male cast, and what is lovely about all of Shannon Hale's fantasy books is that that is not remotely true. While she does write interesting and cute male characters, her focus is on female characters, and that is such a beautiful and important thing to see. Also, before I start talking about her books, I just want to highly recommend that you go and follow Shannon Hale on Twitter. She has a lot of really important things to say, but one of my favorite things that she constantly talks about is the fact that there is no such thing as girl books and boy books. It is a subject I'm really passionate about and one that I've considered doing a discussion video on, but basically I just find that it's very limiting to say that some books are for girls and all these other books are for boys, and there can't be any overlap. Shannon Hale talks about this subject constantly in ways that are impressive and interesting, and I just absolutely love following her on Twitter. So if you don't think that any of these books are for you, please still go follow her on Twitter because I think that she has some really important stuff to say on there as well. Anyway, let's just jump into talking about all of her books. The first book that I ever read by Shannon Hale was Book of 1,000 Days. This book begins, my lady and I are being shut up in a tower for 7 years. Basically, the plot of this book is that there is a lady named Lady Sarin, and she is supposed to marry a man. She refuses because she fears him, and so her and her maid are locked in a tower for a number of years. Her maid's name is Dashti, and she is our main character and narrator, and it is her writing the account of her and Lady Sarin staying in this tower for 7 years, and, as she says at the beginning, their adventures thereafter. This book is such a good introduction to Shannon Hale in that it is completely about the relationship between Dashti and Lady Sarin. It is also about a romance. This is a retelling of a fairy tale, much like a few of Shannon Hale's other books are, but it is full of beautifully complex female characters, a wonderful romance. This just is such a hallmark of what Shannon Hale writes and what she's all about, and this is a great way to be introduced to her, so I'm really glad this was the first one I read personally. After Book of 1,000 Days, the next Shannon Hale that I read in general were the Books of Bairn. The Books of Bairn are a 4-part series beginning with The Goose Girl. This was Shannon Hale's debut novel, and this first one, is a retelling of a Grimm's story by the same name. This book is about a princess named Ani who is born, and she doesn't open her eyes for 3 days, but she is born with the words of a foreign language on her tongue. She grows up learning the language of swans, and later she learns the language of other creatures. But as her gift continues to grow, her mother begins to fear for her and decides to send her away to a foreign land. This is an absolutely beautiful book. It has prose that is incredible. incredible. The character of Ani is wonderful to read about, and in general, it is also a great introduction to Shannon Hale, and it is a beautiful debut novel. The next books in the series are Enna Burning, followed by River Secrets, and then Forest Born. And what is great about this series is, you know that feeling that you get when you just wish that a side character had their own book because you think they're so interesting? That's exactly what this series is. Each book is a continuation of a side character from the previous book so that you get to learn all about. I would actually say that Enna Burning, the second book, is my favorite in the series because I find Enna so fascinating, and she was a character I adored in the Goose Girl, so when she got her own book, I was very pleased. But altogether, the books of Bairn make up a gorgeous story of female characters. It is full of magical abilities and beautiful writing in general, and yeah, this is just a beautiful series. It is one of my favorites because of how strong the writing is. The next book that I read by Shannon Hale was actually one of her adult fiction books, and that is Austenland. This is a completely adorable and wonderful story. It follows a woman named Jane, and she has never been able to meet the right man in her life, possibly because she is just so obsessed with Colin Firth in the BBC Pride and Prejudice series. She is in love with Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy. And then a relative gives Jane the gift of going to a resort for Austen-obsessed women where you get to pretend you are in the world of Austen and you get to meet Regency gentlemen and fall in love. It is adorable, it's beyond fun, it's a little bit silly, but overall it's just such a fun ride, especially for those who love Jane Austen. This book also has a sequel called Midnight in Austenland, which is not really connected to this. That one is actually more of a mystery, I would say, than a romance, but overall I think that they are both really fantastic. They're just light, happy reads that make your heart glow a little bit. And the last books that I want to talk about that I have read by Shannon Hale are the Princess Academy books. So as you can see, Princess Academy Book 1 does have a Newbery Honor Award, and I think it highly deserved that award. This book follows a mountain girl named Miri. She lives on the mountains with her family, and basically they work in the quarry, they send stone down to the kingdom below, and that is just how they live their lives. And then word comes that for some reason the prince has to marry someone, and that this future princess is going to be chosen from this mountain land. And so all of the girls are sent to a princess academy so that they can learn to be proper ladies for the prince. This is such a story, I say this over and over again, that you think you know exactly the kind of story you're getting into. It sounds like a fairly generic plot, but it is so much more than that. This book features an almost exclusively female cast, obviously, as most of these do. And it is about so many types of girls working together, being part of something greater, being a part of a community, and just trying to find acceptance of themselves. Miri is a beautiful main character, and her relationships with the other women in her life are also just wonderful to read about because they are so genuinely complex and fascinating. And this first book is definitely just a sweet, cute ride. Eventually, of course, there is a romance. However, I would say that that is not the focus of this book in the least. But I would argue that the beauty of the Princess Academy books is not the first one, but how the three of them work together overall. All three of these books do follow Miri, but each one takes place in a new location, and there are new casts of characters to go along with Miri. The third book, The Forgotten Sisters, wound up being one of my favorite books of last year because of the new female characters that were introduced. I think it discusses femininity and gender roles in such an interesting and important way, but while also being super accessible. I would say that the Princess Academy books fall somewhere between middle grade and young adult, and that is why I think they're so important. And this is one of the strongest final books in a series that I've ever read. It just ends on such a beautiful note, and overall, it just makes the series so impressive. Shannon Hale has written a few other books that I haven't personally read. First of all, The Actor and the Housewife. This is also adult fiction. It is just about a woman who lives in Salt Lake City, and she happens to meet the actor that she loves most. Somehow, this housewife and this actor wind up becoming friends, and the story goes on from there. One of Shannon Hale's books that is more middle grade aimed is Rapunzel's Revenge, and this comes along with a sequel called Calamity Jack. This was a series that Shannon Hale wrote with her husband. Jack, by the way, is Jack of Beanstalk fame. It is supposed to be a swashbuckling adventure following Rapunzel, and I've heard amazing things about this book overall, as well as the sequel. She also has the Storybook A Legend series. This was written to go along with the YouTube series, and for the Ever After High dolls. Basically, the reviews for this book talk about it being incredibly silly and something that a lot of people feel like they shouldn't have loved as much as they did, but it wound up being fluffy and fun to read anyway. And her last series is a series called The Princess in Black. This is a series that was also written along with Shannon Hale's husband. It is a children's series about femininity and princesses who also love to wear black and can kick butt on the side. And overall, I've heard that this is a really impressive and influential series to younger kids as well. Okay, so those are all of Shannon Hale's books. I would personally recommend, if I have convinced you at all to start reading Shannon Hale books, I would personally recommend that you start with Book of 1,000 Days. I think that it gives you the greatest idea of the kind of characters that she writes and the kind of female relationships that she writes. It also has a bit of that fairy tale vibe because it is a retelling, which I think is a vibe that she carries throughout all of her books. Just the kind of cheery love stories, even if the books are dealing with more serious topics. So if you're gonna jump into Shannon Hale, I would definitely recommend that you start with Book of 1,000 Days or start in with the Goose Girl, because I think that that is where her writing is the strongest. It was her debut, so it's a great book to read if you want to read where Shannon Hale started and see where she went from there. I would say that that is just as wonderful a way to start reading Shannon Hale as Book of 1,000 Days, in that it shows you the same complex female relationships that you're going to get along with the beautiful writing style that she carries throughout all of her writing. Those are my two favorites. I would say Book of 1,000 Days is my favorite, and then the books of Bayern, and then The Princess Academy, and then Austenland. And as I said, of the books of Bayern, Enna Burning is my favorite. That second book I just think is fantastic. Anyway, I hope that I've given you a lot to think about regarding Shannon Hale. I hope that I've convinced you to pick up some of her books. They were influential to me, and I think that she will continue to be an influential author in my reading life. If you've read any Shannon Hale books, please let me know down below, especially if you've read some of the books that I haven't read. What did you think about those? Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!